Prior to the start of the episode, I want to warn listeners that I do recount examples of physical and sexual violence, as well as discriminatory behaviors. Remember to breathe and take breaks if this content becomes triggering. All names in the episode are pseudonyms and do not detail any identifying information in order to maintain confidentiality. In this episode, I do refer to different Indigenous thought leaders. The first individual is Dr. Terry L. Cross, whose article, The Relational Worldview Model, helps guide some of my argumentation. Dr. Terry L. Cross was the founding executive director of the National Indian Child Welfare Association, NICWA. NICWA still exists today, and you can go to nicwa.org/ways to give to make a financial donation. Michelle Lorna Nahani is the second Indigenous leader, and she's a facilitator who has created her own workbook and a workshop that serves as a board game and decolonizing exercise. Feel free to purchase her workbook at decolonizeeverything.org. The last sign of respect I'd like to offer is gratitude to the natural world, which supported and acted as relatives to the Onondaga and Suquamish, including the bio and wildlife of the Woluwe in the northwest Pacific shoreline and northeastern lakes near Canandaigua Lake. There are so many ways to make a child smile. Karaoke, a pet store, off-trail hiking, art, a new movie, dessert for dinner, a witty comeback, lights out at 10:30 instead of 10, positive encouragement, a compliment, an adult who wants to listen to them. There are also so many ways to hurt a child. One of the administrative staff used to tell us, when you meet a new client and you read their chart, remember to tell yourself, this is a hurt child. Then you'll have empathy for them despite what they've done. See them for what they are, a hurt child. I wonder, how many hurt kids did we continue to hurt? My name is Kirby Crow, and you're listening to Human Shields, an abolitionist critique of behavioral healthcare. In today's episode, we'll connect how behavioral healthcare plays out like a Hitchcock film and focus on the most vulnerable victims, the incarcerated youth. This episode starts at the end. The end is 5 hurt children. Robbie. Robbie loved their mother. She's my hero, they said. She taught them how to fish and play chess. Robbie was the victim of childhood sexual and physical abuse. Robbie's father committed domestic violence against their mother. They grew up around community violence. Then, as a young teenager, they perpetuated against 2 siblings. After a few months in our program, they were unsuccessfully discharged after assaulting several staff members, 2 of which was over using a radio inappropriately. There was a phrase Robbie would use that was a warning sign. If Robbie said it, you knew they would become aggressive. I don't care. Over and over again. I don't care. To this day, I hate when someone uses that phrase. Robbie's parent decided they didn't want to wait the 30 days for our facility to find another treatment program for the child. Robbie's parents reportedly said, well, at least Robbie wasn't hitting anyone at home. That's one way to talk about Robbie. Here's another. Robbie grew up in a household with several relatives. At night, Robbie would need a radio to fall asleep. Sleeping in silence with unrelenting anxiety was unbearable for Robbie. Music helped distract, provide a sense of safety. Robbie adored both their parents. In one conversation, Robbie would talk about the joyful memories they spent as a child with their father, and the next they would talk about how terrifying it was when Dad hit Mom. One of the administrative staff explained, Robbie is creating violent relationships with staff because they're trying to recreate their trauma. In the relationships with us staff, Robbie wasn't a victim. Robbie could be in control, knowing we would not hurt them. There were moments Robbie tried to change, but a residential treatment center is an emotionally demanding environment. And like any person, Robbie would crack. Except when Robbie cracked, their behaviors were explosive. When treatment facilities are created, they don't want kids to end up like Robbie. It's not a part of their logic model. A logic model is a physical representation or outline of a program's services. For youth residential treatment, it focuses on the youth and the youth's family, but not the conditions which led to violence as a reoccurring theme in the youth's life. I jokingly refer to residential treatment as a box. You put people inside, close the lid, and shake the box. Shake it until you think it's ready to open, and voila, you have a new kid. In the podcast Doing the Work, Frontline Stories of Social Change, Nicole Vasquez, MSW, shares with host Shimon Cohen how critical race theory critiques liberalism and the focus of individual moral failings rather than system dysfunction. This critique stands against the typical logic model of residential treatment. In one version of Robbie's story, he's an aggressor, a problem, a menace. In another version, he's too traumatized for what society believes is the solution that is supposed to fix him. He needs something else, but that something else doesn't exist. Vasquez, in a later episode of the podcast, discusses the separation between conditions and behavior as a way to distract from social injustices. And she's not wrong. Robbie's brain size was smaller than most children. Why? Because the toxic stress of their upbringing hindered their neural development. The first way to hurt a child is to wait until they become a problem before you want to help them. Someone in some room, somewhere, doesn't think of Robbie as a person. They think of Robbie as a problem. The label of problem gets kids like Robbie thrown into the same unit with 7 other problem kids who are all some of the most traumatized in the state. That's when the real problem begins. One of Robbie's physical assaults was after a kid stormed up to him and screamed into their face. Robbie chased after the kid, got on top of them while the kid fell, and punched them repeatedly. Kids like Robbie, they never escape the violence. No. Kids like Robbie are placed in boxes. Charlie. Charlie enjoyed horror video games. They used to talk in obnoxious voices, and one time Charlie hissed at me when I teased him. So I naturally hissed back. Charlie laughed, and so did I. Charlie was what we refer to as an asterisk client. Asterisks are those fancy stars on your keypads and keyboards. Typically, they're used to tell a reader, hey, there's a note at the bottom. Make sure to read it. That's not how we use them. Each residential treatment program will have a set curriculum for clients to complete. That could be different projects, workbooks, assignments, along with a specific number of group/individual sessions. However, no matter how many questions someone can answer, how many worksheets they complete, how many group sessions they present, that work doesn't mean they are going to develop the skills necessary to avoid problematic behavior. When clients hit the 1-2 year mark in our program, and they had completed the curriculum and still lacked the social skills, they became an asterisk client. The asterisk was an excuse, a way to avoid saying out loud, our program didn't quite change kids. They didn't come out of the box as brand new and shiny as that logic model said they would. In fact, some of our asterisk clients reoffended, were transferred to different facilities, or continued to engage in different problematic behavior post-discharge. We graduated one asterisk client because their unit therapist did not fulfill the responsibilities correctly. We felt guilty the therapist screwed up. We graduated another asterisk client because we graduated the first client, and it wouldn't be fair if we didn't also graduate this one too. We graduated another client because we wanted to maintain a relationship with client's county so they would keep sending referrals to us. We graduated clients like Charlie because we have to, quote, keep them moving along. The School of Social Work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a group of social workers, conducted a systematic review of the effectiveness of children's behavioral health interventions. Published in the Children and Youth Services Review in 2020, the article chose to synthesize different interventions in youth psychiatric treatment services. Interventions can be anything from different kinds of therapies, behavior management models, and discharge planning. The group of researchers, Paul Lanier, Todd Jensen, Catherine Bryan, Gerald Chung, Roderick Rose, Quentin Smith, and Lisa Lackman, found each facility used its own set of interventions. No one was the same. One facility used mode D of activation therapy, another CBT, a third EMDR. Some focused on family therapies and family engagement. Some facilities used specific programs or curriculum, each with a fancy name. The The researchers found there was a scarcity of research measuring the effectiveness of interventions delivered in psychiatric residential treatment facilities. The researchers claimed this should be, quote, alarming to families, advocates, practitioners, and policymakers, end quote, because the lack of evidence doesn't mean the interventions are ineffective, but there isn't clarity in, quote, what works, end quote. Alarming. We should be alarmed. That's what they said. The second way to hurt a child is to ignore important questions. Like, why the fuck are we using asterisks in behavioral health care? Let's take a break. Alex. Alex always said hello to every staff member, even if that person was on the other side of the parking lot. Alex was a member of the LGBTQ+ community who could only talk about their gender identity to their unit therapist. In fact, one therapist said Alex hanging a pride flag on their door was advertising their sexuality. Alex's parents refused to discuss Alex's desire for a gender transition while in treatment. Staff members would approach me and say, "Why can't Alex just wait to figure this out until after they're out of here?" This negative perception towards Alex's gender identity is rooted in the linear worldview. A worldview is one person's understanding of themselves and their relationship with the larger community and universe. A person's worldview is fluid and changes as they learn different philosophies and ideas. In the linear worldview, A plus B equals C. If you have a problem, give them treatment, and the result will be a fixed kid. But life isn't that simple. Terry L. Cross, a member of the Seneca tribe, identifies the linear worldview as narrow, unable to see the person holistically. For queer people, incorporating our social identities in our wellness is essential, because without it, we are unable to build authentic, positive self-identity and perspective of the world. Asking Alex to compartmentalize their identity encouraged feelings of shame and doubt. What put the final nail in the coffin was our facility disempowering Alex from making decisions about their care plan related to their new identities. Michelle Lorna Nahani's Decolonized First. Nahani discusses the difference between colonial and decolonial lenses. Nahani contrasts chinchentswa, the Squamish verb to uphold and uplift one another, to helping. Chinchentswa focuses on collaboration and shared power. If someone is helping another, the relationship features only one individual with power. In psychiatry and in residential treatment, the biomedical model views abnormal behavior as a symptom that needs to be treated. This traditionally has given authority to medical professionals over individuals themselves. With a decolonial lens, medical professionals can avoid creating traumatic, inequitable relationships with individuals. Unfortunately, Alex didn't get better. In fact, their behaviors became much worse. Alex started making false accusations, using racist hate rhetoric against staff, destroying property, and fantasizing again about their victims. Dr. Stephen T. Russell, Dr. Amanda P. Plott, Dr. Gu Li, and Dr. Arnold Grossman published an article in the Adolescent Health Brief in 2018 that found if a trans child is allowed to use their chosen name, the child is likely to experience reduced depressive symptoms, suicidal ideation, and suicidal behavior. If we flip that and say a child can't transition, is told they need to wait to transition, then what are we doing to that child? What harm are we causing? The power of a name, the power of identity, is so inextricably linked to wellness. Separating a child from that is traumatic. The third way to hurt a child is to take their power away from them and force them to live in a hollow shell of themselves. The fourth child's name was Tim. Tim had an obnoxious giggle and sometimes would get into a fit of laughter and be unable to get out of it. You are probably expecting me to recount how treatment harmed Tim, but the truth is, Tim developed an incredible amount of emotional regulation and social skills. They grew as a leader and became a role model for newer clients on the unit. After treatment, Tim didn't go home because their adoptive family didn't trust them. It didn't matter what they accomplished because their family didn't believe it. They're probably okay now living back in the community, and honestly, treatment probably put them on a better path. But one's individual survival through a violent system does not prove the system's effectiveness. Reformers latch onto examples like Tim as poster children for how problematic institutions can be fixed. And this acceptance for plugging in leaks when they occur invalidates the abolition movement, because reformers believe you can detach institutions from their worldview that they were born in. Abolitionists do not. What is violence? What is safety? What is healing? If residential treatment can harm children, then it begs us to ask, what is the purpose of behavioral health care? Tyler Duma wrote an article in 2021 titled Do No Harm in Due Process, a historical analysis of social determinants of institutionalization in the USA, in the journal History of Psychiatry. Duma details the historical process of institutionalization, stating there were minimal standards for admission. Sometimes a medical professional only needed to identify a, quote, need for treatment. No criteria was created, no assessments or results to measure. Because of these minimal standards, admission processes were fraudulent. Increasing admissions, even when it was unnecessary, was a way to receive increased federal funding. In addition, patients would be exploited as a free labor source. Even if institutions were dedicated to the mission of healthcare, the paradigm equated health with morality. Someone was acting badly, and that's why they were exhibiting the symptoms they were. They only needed to learn how to be good. This is the origin of shame and stigmatization towards wellness. In 2020, Disability Justice Network of Ontario's panel, Abolish the Psych Ward, confronted this disempowerment and stigmatization. Dr. Emil Joseph of McMaster University and Dr. Cyrus Marcus Ware questioned the inequitable relationships found in behavioral health care. While Dr. Emil Joseph likens the use of community exile to the confine, contain, and removal colonial mentality towards undesirable populations, Dr. Cyrus Marcus Ware questions why different minds are not celebrated, but instead are pathologized. Both argue there were political motives to distinguish mental health from mental illness, and these motives were based in what could get profits and what targeted populations a government could disempower wealth from. Both activists encourage the use of mad epistemologies and to allow individuals who identify as mad, a reclaimed word for those who have been negatively labeled as insane, to lead and be sources for how behavioral health care should function. There's the idiom, blind leading the blind. Did anyone ever question, what does it mean to be blind? What does it mean to be mad? And why should sane people be experts in madness when they're the normal ones? The fourth way to hurt a child is to make their survival your proof. In the beginning of this episode, I named 5 hurt children at the end. I don't know the 5th child's name because I didn't work with them. I read about them. Cambria Hills of East Bethel in Duluth, Minnesota was a former psychiatric residential treatment facility. They closed their doors in June 2021 due to a financial dispute with the state about financial support for their programming. Because psychiatric facilities compared to typical residential facilities incorporate more services, more staff, and larger accommodations, there is a rate adjustment to charge insurance companies in order to cover the costs. According to reporter Tommy Widia of ABC5 KSTP Eyewitness News, the facility did not admit to its failure to address neglect and inadequate policies. Cambria Hills was placed on a conditional license in October of 2020 for failing to conduct background checks of their employees, incomplete client documentation, neglect of responding to client grievances, and the failure to report critical incidences involving sexual conduct between residents and the attempted suicide of a resident. To make this feel more real, in the facility I worked in, we had 6 clients who engaged in sexual contact with one another. Not all of them were consensual. We had one therapist who was unable to complete documentation according to state standards. In a clinical meeting, our clinical supervisor said, if DHS pulls any of those files that therapist had been responsible for, it would not be good for us. We had one employee, a man, who HR hired without conducting a background check. Sometime later, in training, he asked another employee, who was a BIPOC woman, to pull down her mask so he could see how attractive she was. She, of course, refused. She drove home. When she stepped out of the car, there was the man, waving, indicating that he had followed her to her apartment. This man would watch movies with sex scenes on the unit and make harassing comments to employees who were women. The last straw was when he tried to verbally intimidate a client to tell him the truth. It wasn't until later that we learned he had a previous domestic violence and stalking charge. Does this feel real now? The fifth way to hurt a child is to turn aside, close your eyes, and walk away. Because if you didn't know they existed before, it'll be easy to pretend they never existed in the first place. The end is 5 hurt children, multiplied by unknown numbers to an amount I can't even fathom. The box is a punitive place where time is malleable, social norms skewed, and reality unreal. To know what it's like to work inside the box, check out episode 3, Under Pressure. A special thank you to Adam Flores for music composition in today's episode.